What is up, mi gente? Happy National Hispanic Heritage Month! So if you didn't know, in the US, September 15th to October 15th is Hispanic Heritage Month. I'm currently hosting a fantasy readathon, and one of the bingo spots is actually a Latinx fantasy read. Now, I'm here to recommend you some Latinx reads that are not just fantasy, but also nonfiction in a very popular genre and staple of Mexican storytelling, which is magic realism. So I hope you pick one or two of these books up and read it during our Heritage Month, and hopefully find a new favorite. Now first, I want to give you a little bit of history in this, okay? So bear with me, stick with me here. Hispanic Heritage Month is really important in the US. We are such a freaking mixed pot. We've had to create these intentional spaces to learn about the different cultures that we have in the US, including Latin culture. But as a little background, the word Hispanic actually has a lot of history behind it. Hispanic was actually created by the Spanish because they conquered and colonized so much of Central and South America. And so if you were from a Spanish descendant and you have some Spanish blood, then you were considered Hispanic. There are so many people that still identify as Hispanic. However, when Spanish colonies finally declared independence, they actually coined the term Latino. So Latino is a word that's actually so different from the word Hispanic. It's meant to bring our identity back and empower the Latin people instead of just going off of what their colonizers labeled them. Now we also have the term Latinx because in Spanish we have masculine and feminine articles. So the chair is female, the car is male. So we have the O's and the A's that determine if it's a feminine or male object. So we don't have anything that we now call gender neutral. And because that's not so inclusive, a lot of scholars ended up declaring the word Latinx, including all people, all genders, everything. So that's the word Latinx. So I wanted to give you a little bit of a background because I am calling this video Latinx books because Latinx tends to include South America, Central America, and the Caribbean. They do not all identify themselves as Hispanic because they're not from Spanish descendants or they're not Spanish speaking. And a lot of the authors I'm talking about today are such a mix, and I will definitely highlight some of my favorites, which are Mexican American stories because I am Mexican American. I hope you enjoyed that mini lesson. Let's go. So of course, I'm gonna start with fantasy recs, and I'm gonna start with a current arc that I'm reading that is coming out in October, and it's called What the River Knows. Oh my gosh. This is Argentinian Bolivian, and it's written by Isabel Allende. This has enemies to lovers, forbidden love, secrecy. So if those are the type of vibes that you like, you're gonna love this book. I am squealing over the banter in here, over the gorgeous sceneries that the author is describing. And Isabel Allende actually went to Egypt because this book takes place in Egypt, and she basically walked everything that her characters walk in the book, which I think is an amazing opportunity for her. You can definitely tell her heart is in this story. She's talked about it over in interviews that this has been a very long-term passion story for her, and here it is. It's here and now. I heard it has a crazy cliffhanger that people are squealing over and demanding the sequel right away, which fortunately she's done. They're just reviewing it. This focuses on our girl Inez, whose parents are archaeologists, and they do so much work in Egypt that they basically live there 6 months out of the year. So she's left with her aunt for a very long time. And one day she discovers that her parents have passed away and something definitely happened to them, and she's determined to know what. This is also like a historical fantasy setting because it is actually set in the 1800s. So Inez is not allowed to be this independent, badass woman. Highly recommended, beautiful story. Again, comes out in October. Next we have my top read of 2022, which is the Sunbearer Trials. This is Mexican inspired, Aztec inspired actually. It is very, very fantasy, but it is so freaking sweet. If you're a fan of Percy Jackson and the Hunger Games, it's like those mixed together, but make it Aztec and Mexican inspired. It made me laugh so hard. I love Teo. It was so sweet. The friendships in there and that plot twist at the end was just blew my mind. So if you like something with a bit more adventure, with a coming of age story, if you also like friends, found family, that is going to be the book for you. It has a lot of Aztec influence because they often talk about dioses and diosas, which are gods and goddesses that are Aztec inspired. So of nature, of bad luck, gods of fertility, gods of the sun, like you have all of these different gods and a lot of lore in there. But I wouldn't say it's super high fantasy that it's very difficult to follow. So if you are new to fantasy, definitely recommend this book for you as well. I swear you're gonna laugh so much in this book, and the sequel is supposed to come out this year, but we haven't heard anything yet. I really hope Aiden Thomas makes an announcement soon. Not to mention, in this book I felt so represented because our MC Trejo actually loves candy, and it actually tends to be Mexican candy. I did get to speak with the author about this and just told them that I appreciated the candy so freaking much, and I could see joy on their face because they're definitely writing for people like me who didn't see themselves in fantasy books even though they love fantasy so much. I adore this book. It is like such a soft spot in my heart. Highly recommend it. Next up, we have an Argentinian American inspired book called Lobizona. This book is way more adventurous, has much more world building, but it also focuses a lot more on topics of immigration, not belonging, being deported. So if you're ever curious about those topics, or you want to know more, or you feel like this is a book that you would relate to, really recommend this. You definitely have to give yourself some time to get into the story, but toward the end it picks up so freaking fast. The twist I did not see coming in this book. I cannot wait to read the sequel, which fortunately is already out, and it's called Cazadora. This is written by Romina Garber, who I had a pleasure of speaking with as well. She's so kind, and she definitely makes a lot of impactful and important points in this book. Like, what does it mean to be the good immigrant? Are those the only immigrants we should accept in a new country? How much should you immerse? How much should you not? And also the stereotypes and sexism within the culture itself. So a lot of machismo, which is a lot of masculinity, is how we would call it, I guess, in English. Those topics are very much highlighted in this book, but not in an overpowering way where you feel like the author's just like throwing this at you and telling you how you should think. It's definitely a discussion and something that made me think as I was reading, but it's also so adventurous, very fantastical, of course, because we have creatures and magical systems and different games. They play a different type of soccer, which is just so fun to read in the book. I think a lot of people will relate with the MC as well, who is trying to figure out her place in this new world and is also very much afraid for her family because they might get deported since they are illegally in this country. Highly recommend if you want to know more about those topics. And Romina Garber actually pulls a lot from her own experiences, being that her parents migrated to the US as well, and they came from Argentina. Now, I cannot not recommend this next book, which is the Death Cast series by Adam Silvera. This is a Puerto Rican author, and the first book is They Both Die at the End, with the prequel being The First to Die at the End. I really recommend you read They Both Die at the End first and then the prequel, because it'll just hit you in the feels much harder. This one's actually an urban fantasy, and I would even argue that it's a bit more sci-fi because it has more technology in it than just a fantasy magical element. Now, it's urban fantasy because it's actually set in our world in New York, but it's almost like an alternate universe. In this world, there is an app that can determine when you are going to die up to 24 hours. So between midnight and 2 a.m., people that are called deckers are called, and they are told that they're gonna die within those 24 hours. And the app is never wrong. Basically, Adam Silvera is posing the question, what would you do if you knew that was your last day? Would you finally get everything you needed to do out of your system? Would you live with less fear if you knew that wasn't your day because you didn't get that call? Of course, in the book, both our characters receive this call. Both of them know they're gonna pass away. They have this beautiful friendship and love, and of course, it's not a spoiler, it's a promise. They both die at the end. Again, this book is really, really beautiful, and I would say my favorite thing about all of the ones I've recommended so far is that they're unapologetically Spanish. Now, maybe in Romina Garber's book, she actually does translate some of the Spanish, but in most of it, they don't, because they don't think they should. It's definitely a deeper topic for another time, but I just loved how they basically decolonized their writing, and they just wrote and they just made sure that people who are part of these cultures understand it, feel seen, feel represented, have fun, and people who aren't will also have so much fun being exposed to new stories, new characters, new narratives. I adore them so much. Make sure you pick one up, and any of these books definitely qualify for the Latinx Fantasy bingo spot. Now I want to dive a little bit more into some nonfiction. So this is a mixed bag of different stories. I think these stories are so powerful, and they just show the authors that really had to pave a way for Latinx stories within the US. I want to start with my most recent read, which is For Brown Girls with Sharp Edges and Tender Hearts. This book was so freaking mind-blowing to me and to the people I recommended read it, because it's a book that I think most Latin women could have used very, very early on in their life. So if you're about to start a new adventure, maybe go into high school, maybe starting college or starting a new job, I highly recommend you read this, because I think you're gonna feel seen, and the author is gonna break down a lot of imposter syndrome, really call out the spaces that were not created for people like us, and help highlight what those things are and how you can combat them so that you continue trailblazing and really hit your goals. She talks about so freaking much. She has so much knowledge in this topic. I heard her at one of her book talks. She writes in such a beautiful way, but definitely a powerful way. Even if you are not a woman of color or Latinx, I think it's a really important read, because she also calls out people who are not from this ethnicity out in the best way possible, in an important way, not hateful, not rough, but very honest and truthful. I think it's just gonna help tear down any barriers. I often found that the most powerful way to get through spaces that aren't necessarily created for minority groups is by understanding what those spaces are. How are they created? What's there, so that you can actually pull out, highlight them, and know how to move past them. And that's how you'll be able to navigate these spaces and actually triumph. By the way, if you have enjoyed or learned anything from this video, make sure you hit that like button or comment. It goes a long way and lets me know you've enjoyed this video. Just like Sunbearer Trials, I cannot go with my most favorite book of 2022, which is the memoir Trejo. Now, he is such a famous actor, from being in every little role you can think of, like in Brooklyn Nine-Nine and Modern Family, to having his own superhero series Machete, and also being a beloved character in Spy Kids. Danny Trejo has been all over Hollywood, but he was also one of the first Chicano Latino actors that we saw very dominant in Hollywood. However, this story isn't just about his glamorous life or anything like that. He talks about addiction, he talks about family trauma, generational trauma, and he also talks about a lot of his jail time and how he was basically raised to be incarcerated and be the best incarcerated person at that. This story made me cry, it made me laugh, it made me weep, and I think my favorite thing about this book that a lot of people don't get, because I saw a lot of bad reviews, so I know a lot of people don't get, is that he wrote this book in a typical Mexican storytelling way. It's gonna have tangents, it's gonna have thoughts, it's gonna have laughter, it's gonna be maybe disjointed, because also Trejo did not really graduate high school or college or anything like that, so he just tells you the story. You can definitely feel it. In the audiobook, he's actually the narrator. I think it's such an important story to tell, especially because in the title it has the word redemption as well, and this is most definitely a redeeming story for Trejo. Freaking love the book. The people that have taken this recommendation and have read it have adored it. It is an incredible book. It's so good, and you cannot believe that this story is true. Amazing. This next one is actually a memoir poetry book, and it made me sob like crazy, and it's called Abuela, Don't Forget Me. Basically, Grandma, Don't Forget Me. The author basically pays tribute to his grandmother, who has been a pillar of strength. He talks about all of the different things that his grandma taught him in this very poetic way as his grandmother is fading. There are so many things things in there that just made me weep because it's so culturally right. It is a Mexican-American author, and I think if you're ever wondered what our matriarch is like or the connections we have with the women in our family, this is such a good book to read. If you miss your own grandma and your own maternal figures and matriarch, read this book. It is so sweet, but it's also so heart-wrenching. Again, it's a poetry book. It's nothing super thick or dense, and actually won a lot of awards. So again, highly recommend this book. Now, if you didn't know, in the US, there are a ton of books being banned. And because of that, I decided to pick a book that was banned even during my high school years, like 10 years ago or so. The book is called Always Running. When I read this in high school, it was already banned in multiple states because it is a true story on gang violence and life. And the author does not shy away at all from the ugly truth. However, the story was so impactful. This author grew up in LA. They thought they were going to live the gang life, die in the gang life, even as things were getting worse, and they started to lose family and friends, believing that a gang is actually a real loyalty unit and a real found family unit. Losing people he actually loved was a big disillusionment for him. Heartbreak shattered everything, and somehow he got out. He became an award-winning poet, he got education, and he lays this all out in his story because he thought he was free until he found out that his own son joined a gang. To prevent his son from actually continuing this life and to prevent all other youth from joining the gangs, he is very candid in this book. Definitely check a lot of trigger warnings because it is graphic. He does talk about every little thing that he saw, but it is definitely a story filled with so much hope. A lot of these stories, a lot of these books are being banned even though they're meant to educate, to prevent, to be a caution tale, to share wisdom. Pick it up, support your banned books, support your local library, give it a try, and let me know what you think. I want to highlight a very important genre that I often found in Mexican stories specifically, and that is magic realism. So magic realism is a type of fantasy, but it is so drastically different from all other fantasies I've seen. And honestly, I'm making a video on fantasy for beginners, so I really had to look into this. Magic realism is so flowery, poetic, lyrical, and I think it just makes so much sense that it's like that because when I heard my grandmother talk about things or give me advice, or my mom or anyone else, even my grandfather and dad, they often use so many metaphors, so many things around nature, around the house, to explain a greater concept to me. And magic realism embeds magic into everyday life, but it's not called out as magic, and that's what makes it different from all other fantasies. So for example, if someone were to write a short story about you watching this video right now, and they said that my heart actually ended up glowing and thumping out of my chest because I'm nervous and excited and passionate about this topic, and the viewer saw my glowing heart, that would be considered magic realism, and you would consider it normal, and I would consider it normal because it's just part of the world and the magic system there. It's nothing weird, nothing strange, and definitely not outrightly called magic. Oftentimes, that form of writing is used to describe a greater theme, a greater story, and so here are 3 books that I want to recommend to you and that are absolutely must-reads. So beautiful, so deep, and very unique to this form of storytelling. The first one is Like Water for Chocolate. Oh my gosh. This book is so incredibly passionate. It is so passionate. Now, if you like romance, if you like spiciness, if you also enjoy some historical romance, I would say this is for you. Our main character adores cooking, but the magic realism happens through her cooking. So if she's sad, for example, crying while she's cooking, the people that eventually eat that dish start sobbing uncontrollably as well. If she's thinking about the love of her life while she's cooking something and someone eats it, there are suddenly super hot and on fire and passionate for someone. And so I adore this story because it combines passion, Mexican storytelling, the historical context of Mexican families and dynamics between mothers and daughters, and cooking. Amazing pillars of my culture that just make me so proud. This book is so stunning, so tragic. It has so much freaking tea in there because the sisters betray each other, do so much, and it has a lot of of intentional healing in there. A lot of generational trauma is talked about here as well. There is a movie to go with it, and they do not shy away from those spicy scenes. So I definitely recommend you read the book, then watch the movie. I think you're gonna absolutely adore it. Now the next one is actually on my TBR, and it's called House of Spirits by renowned author and known for magical realism, Isabel Allende. I heard this story is definitely spooky, hauntings, but dark, passionate, deep. Now, similar to the previous book, this follows generations of a family, so 3 generations, and we see the tragedies, the triumphs, the struggles, the dreams, all of that weaved together. It is considered such an iconic classical piece of literature. I can't believe it's taken me this long to read it, but I 100% want to try this book. I must try this book. If you pick it up, let me know. Maybe we can even buddy read this. But I'm definitely in the mood for a more fall, deep storytelling, and this is definitely that type of atmosphere. Now for one of my most recent reads, and I had no idea it was magical realism until I finally checked it out of the library, and it's called The Inheritance of Orquídea Divina. Now this is actually part of my 12 Recs challenge, which I can't wait to make a wrap-up video at the end, where 12 different friends give me their top recommendation. I have such a mixed bag in my 12 Recs. You basically read 1 book a month for that year, and it exposes you to different genres and different books. Now this book has been such a ride because it has so many elements that I saw in my own household. For example, a strong matriarch, the grandmother that really runs the household, cousins with different stories and bonds, and families that all come together and are somehow so destructive but so unified at the same time. And I think my favorite thing is that it has a lot of dichos. So it's really hard to translate dichos. I think the closest translation anyone has gotten has been proverbs. So these are like cautionary lines or sayings that give you an advice or a tip or just something in a brief way, but it's used so often, so commonly. There are so many dichos that I don't even know, but I've heard around my household, and every time I meet with my mom, I swear I learn a new dicho. So this one has so many, and they actually end up manifesting a lot in magic realism. So Orquídea Divina is the head of the household. She is passing away in her final days. She writes letters to all of her living relatives. They all come to her house, and guess what? They find this woman turning into a tree, vines coming out of the lower half of her body, and it's normal. It's normal for them to see Orquídea in some magical way. So this is where magic realism comes in. Now they have to figure out what it is that she exactly left behind for all of them, and the inheritance that she is leaving for each and every single family member. And they all come, like I said, with different experiences. Just because you grew up in the same house doesn't mean you have the same point of view or experience within that house. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I think it's also so tragic and so honest because not everyone loves Orquídea Divina. Not everyone had the best experience with Orquídea, but at the same time, that is the woman that raised them, that is the woman that fought for them, and she also has a very tragic background that plays into that generational experience. And those are some of my recs for Hispanic Heritage Month, y'all. I hope you pick 1 or 2 out and find a book you really adored. Please join our readathon. You'll be exposed to so many other genres, so many other books. It is primarily focused on fantasy, but it is super mood reader friendly and takes place over 3 months, so you can take it easy, have fun. If you've enjoyed this video, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Thank you for watching, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!